Hi, my name is Tina. I'm head of design of Victoria Designs. In this video and also in part 2, Alexandra will show you exactly how to craft the beautiful journal she created with the principles of our Discover the Woods Junk Journal project pack. Alexandra has her own YouTube channel named Alexandra M, and she makes the most amazing, stunning paper crafting projects. I have been following her channel for years now and I have learned so much. If you want to expand your creative abilities, take a look at her channel and subscribe. It's worth it. And now I'm going to give the word to Alexandra. Enjoy.
When I start to work on a journal and decide which pages I'm going to use, in case they're digital, I first print the digital pages out. And that helps me to identify the size of the page and correspondingly the size of the journal that I'm going to have. This page design was printed on the tea-dyed copy paper. You can see how slightly faded the colors look on this tea-dyed paper. Prior to printing it on the tea-dyed paper, I printed it on the regular same paper but white color, not treated with tea or anything like that. So you can see that the colors look absolutely different in both cases, although it is the same image, the same digital file that we're working with here. So that's just something to bear in mind and think which effect exactly you want to achieve. The next thing is if you want to print them on both sides or to have the print on one side only. In my journal that I'm going to show you how to make, I eventually decided to go with one side printing option. I printed all the pages and then I had to, of course, trim the white borders. This page measures, when unfolded, 9 3/4 by 7.5. That means that when you fold it in half, and make sure to match the corners nicely, the size of the page when folded will be 7.5 by 4 7/8. Now I knew how I wanted my signatures to look like and how to fold the pages. So I printed altogether 22 sheets of digital designs from the Discover the Woods project pack, and I separated them into 2 groups. Each group had 11 sheets, and those 11 sheets I folded one page with the design facing out and the next page with the design facing in. And I kept on doing that and alternate the pages when I built the signatures. And this way, as you can see, you have one spread with the printed design that you can either use for further embellishing or for writing if it's possible, like in this case, and the next spread you can use only for writing. Once I had the signatures folded, I could decide what will be the size of my journal covers. I like to make my covers just slightly bigger than the pages, and that's why my covers will be 7 3/4 by 5 inches wide. These are the covers. Next, we have to decide what will be the width of the spine. My journal will have 2 signatures, but also it will have a little insert in between those signatures, and I want to have something like a folder maybe to hold little pieces of ephemera on the back of the front cover, and also an expandable envelope on the back cover of my journal. So that's what we need to take into consideration when deciding how wide the spine of the journal needs to be. And we will get to this point a little bit later on in the video. I want to cover my journal with fabric, and for the fabric to match the project pack that we're working with, I needed to print certain designs on fabric by myself. I used some freezer paper. I bought freezer paper in a roll. This is how it looks. These are the measurements of the roll. I tear the necessary amount of paper that I need first, and then I cut the paper sheets to the size of the 8.5 by 11 inches, and that's because that's the size that I can fit into my printer. And freezer paper, if you have seen it before, has one shiny side and one side is matte. The fabric will be attached to the freezer paper on its shiny side. So next, once I have the freezer paper in the size that I want, once again 8.5 by 11, I take a piece of fabric. This is muslin, and I trim the fabric to be slightly larger than the freezer paper sheet. That's because after I attach the fabric to the freezer paper, I will need to trim the edges and make two of those parts match one another. As I mentioned before, I take next the ironing board. I put the fabric piece first, then the freezer paper with the shiny side facing down, and I use my iron to attach the fabric to the freezer paper. And then I just keep on ironing it to the end, making sure that I iron the edges good. For trimming the edges, you can use either a very sharp edge of a craft knife or a rotary cutter, just like that. So I take my ruler and I align it just at the edge of the freezer paper, and then cut this fabric off. And I do this for all the four sides to get this result. So I have fabric on one side and the freezer paper on the other. Next, to make sure that this sheet, fabric sheet, will feed nicely into my printer, I take some washi tape and attach it on the short side of the fabric sheet, like that. And I fold it here. And this way I know that this edge of the paper is securely connected together and will not separate when I feed it into my printer. So I just cut off the edges of the washi tape, and this now is ready to be printed on. So let's move to the printer. This is my printer. It is the HP Color Laser Jet Pro M255DW. I will use this feeder right here and carefully feed my paper into the slot. Next, we need to choose the design that we want to print. And this is the design that I want to have printed onto my fabric sheet. So I'm going to print, and then, yes, I want to print it in portrait orientation to make one copy of it. That's the size of the paper that I fed into my printer. I'm going with the full page, and I'm using the fill page option, and I hit print. You can see that it folded here. The page folded, but that's fine. I don't know what happened. It always happens when you film a tutorial. Something goes wrong, right? But that is fine. We will not use that corner. I have these ones printed nicely, and this one I planned to cut to little squares anyways. I'm sure you got the idea of how exactly to do that. Next, we can just separate the freezer paper and the fabric, and it's very easy to do. You just peel off the fabric, and you can see that the ink bled to the freezer paper as well. Here we have our Victoria Designs fabric that we can further on use for creating our journal. This is so cool, right? I love it. I even like this effect of a folded page. It looks interesting. Now I can decide which pages I want, which fabrics to be correct. I want to use on my front and on my back cover, and I think I will go with 2 of these. I want to use leather for the spine of my journal. That's why I will now cover both of the chipboard pieces for the front and for the back of my journal with fabric, and then I will work on the spine. I use glue stick for adhering the fabric to the chipboard. Since I have a large surface here to cover with glue, this jumbo glue stick is absolutely perfect. I make sure that I cover the edges with glue. You kind of see against the light if I covered them with glue all over. And then I will put my fabric, I will put my chipboard on fabric so that I have about 1/2 inch border all around. So let's burnish. Next, we need to trim the excess fabric, and for doing that I use a template You can use your ruler, that's fine. I just like to leave about 3/4 of an inch from all the sides of the cover, and that's why I have the template right here. You can use your rulers as well. This one is about 1 inch wide, that's fine too. Just my personal preference to use the 3/4 of an inch template. So I do it like that, and like that, and the same thing on the second cover. We can use the scraps in our project as well. I still don't know where and how, but of course I'm keeping those. Next, we need to trim the corners and wrap our covers. I'm using this corner mitering tool for trimming the corners of my fabric. I will not stop specifically on that tool, but if you search mitering tool on either Etsy or eBay, I'm sure you will be able to find something. The thing is that once you trim your corners, you need to have about 1/8 of an inch from the corner of the chipboard to the edge of the fabric. And that's because we want the corners of the chipboard to be covered with fabric and not to show. Let me trim the second piece. Now I can use smaller glue stick to adhere the edges of the fabric to the chipboard cover. I kind of pull the fabric towards the inside of the chipboard page and remove the threads on the way if there are any threads fraying. Okay, now let's add some glue here in the corners and then to the chipboard again, and fold this edge in. Now you will see that in the corners you might want to tuck them more to the inside, just like that. And that's the corner that we want to have here. Same thing from this side. I add more glue to the corners first, and then I add the glue to the chipboard and fold the fabric. Okay, that's our first piece, and that will be the back cover of our journal. Let me do the same for the front cover and get back to you. The covers are ready, and now we can work on the spine. That's the time to decide how wide the spine of our journal needs to be. So my calculations are like this. I hope this makes sense to all of you. So I decided that I will have 2 of my signatures right here. Let me guide you through this, okay? In the middle, between the signatures, I will have an insert for holding ephemera. So that means that the distance between the signatures and the insert in my case will be 3/8 of an inch. And then I will have about 1/4 of an inch from each side. And that's because I want to add, as I mentioned previously, something like a folder on the back of the front cover and an envelope on the back cover to hold some additional notes. So we have 3/8, 3/8, and here another 1/2 inch. Altogether, my spine should be 1 1/4. Then I want to add 1/8 of an inch from the left and from the right, and that's for the thickness of the leather that I'm going to use and for the thickness of the chipboard, so that when the journal is folded we have a nice fold and no crinkling. So the leather together with the chipboard is about 1/8 of an inch in thickness. And then I want my leather piece to reach about 3/4 of an inch away from the edge of the cover. So I added 3/4 of an inch from the left and from the right side to my measurements. And that gave me 3 inches in total. So my leather piece for the spine needs to be 3 inches by 7 3/4. And this is what I have right here. I will be gluing the leather piece to the covers using some strong glue. To know where exactly I need to glue the leather piece on the cover, I drew a guideline on the front cover as well as on the back cover, and this guideline is 3/4 of an inch away from the edge of the cover itself. So now let's glue our spine piece to the covers. That's the glue that I want to use today. Didn't let me down so far. Okay, so I will be applying, I think you can use Beacon fabric tack as well. I will be applying glue right here. I think I might have applied too much. Okay, so I will just spread it. Make sure that I have enough glue in the corners. Okay, now let's align the leather with the guideline and gently press down without stretching the leather too much. Okay, perfect. Now we can do the same on the other side. Great. So strong glue is great, but we want to make sure that the cover stays in place exactly where we want it to stay, and that's why I want to add some brads here along the edge of the leather piece. I will attach the brads about 1/4 of an inch away from the edge of the leather. I can now take my poking tool and mark one hole here in the center. Then I think I will have another hole about 3/8 away from either of the sides, and another one about, let's say, 3/4 1 3/4 of an inch away from the central hole. That's what we'll have. Let me tell you where the holes will be. So one of them will be at 3/8. The second will be at 2 1/8. Third, 3 7/8. 5 5/8. And well, I have it here at 7 7.5, but I think 7 3/8 is also fine. I think I moved my ruler just a little bit. Okay, so 7 3/8, the fifth hole. Now I have the holes marked, and I will just reinforce them with the poking tool and then add the brads in there. And now the brads are set in place, and that's how our cover looks like right now. Let's just put the pages in to see how it looks. I like it. That's when I like to use distress ink and distress the edges of the cover just a bit, and the same on the inside of the cover. Our signatures will have to be, of course, attached to something, and we will have a hollow spine. That's why we will take a piece of the craft cardstock. Next, that's what I like to use in my journals. I'll take this piece, and it is the same height as the pages, 7.5 inches long, and the width of it is 3 3/4 of an inch. I scored it at 1 1/4 on each side, left and right, and then I scored the space in between those two score lines at every 1/8 of an inch. And that's because I want my spine to curve easier. Now on the back of this piece, I want to mark the places for the holes to be, and to those in those places we will stitch our pages. I will be using 3 holes pamphlet stitch for sewing my signatures in, and the holes will be in every signature at 1 inch, 3 3/4, and 6.5 inches. That's my template, so I will just transfer those marks to the back of the spine that I'm going to sew my signatures to. Now I will connect those marks. I will then mark the center of this piece, and I have there a scored line to help me, but if you can't see right here because of the lighting, it is at 1 7/8 there. And then back to the measurements that we made before, we need to have 3/8 of an inch away from the center for each one of our signatures. So I will also mark those places, connect the marks. And now I can see where exactly I need to poke the holes for the signatures. Right here. I marked them, and now I can use my poking tool and poke them. Okay. So let me go ahead and do that. Here they are, our holes. Next, I will take another piece of muslin, and to the side of this craft cardstock that will be positioned like this, and then the signatures will go here. To the front of our spinal piece, I want to glue another piece of muslin, and this one is about 9 inches by 3 inches wide. I will use my glue stick again to apply a generous amount of glue to the center of the spinal piece and also to the sides, but you remember that our fabric doesn't reach the very edges of the paper piece, so just don't apply too much glue. It would be really nice to iron this piece again. And then I will apply more glue here and fold this flap. And the same thing we'll do with the second flap right here. Now we can sew the signatures in. Before doing that, I just want to reinforce the holes, to poke them once again so that I can see them from both sides of this piece. Perfect. In the center, I will be adding the ephemera folder. So I'm not going to sew my signatures in there, but to the first row and to the third row, I will definitely sew my signatures. Now we need to poke the holes in this pile of papers that we have. So I'm holding them all together and place my template in the center. Then I have this punching cradle that my husband made for me, and I use it a lot. You can poke the holes in any way which is convenient to you. I know that some people use dictionaries for doing that. Okay, so now I poked the holes, and I think what will be good to do is to hold this pile together. So I will use some bulldog clips, and that's just because I want to ensure that my holes stay where they are, and this whole signature can be poked with the needle easily, and that nothing moves. So let's do one signature at a time. We have this one ready. This is the thread that I'm usually using. It's an upholstery thread. It's very thick, and I like how it proved itself until now. So to know what's the length of the thread that I need, I just fold it twice along the length, along the height of the pages, and then add just a bit more to make sure that I have enough. Then I thread this thick needle, and I use that bulldog clip to hold that piece of the thread. I start from the central hole and I go from the inside of the signature pile to the outside. Then I go through the central hole in the spine. Then I put it from the outside of the spinal piece and through the outside of the signature pile to the inside. Then I go again to the middle hole and from the outside of the third hole in the spine through the outside of the third hole in the signatures to the inside. Then I go through the central hole again, wind my thread around like so, go back into that same hole like this, remove the needle, lightly pull by the threads to make sure that they are nice and tight, and tie a knot. And you can trim the excess thread like so. Our first signature is attached to the spine. Now we can do the same with the second signature. I will not film the process, and it will be the same as for the first signature, and I will sew this signature to the third row of holes on the spine. And our second signature is in place as well. Already starts to take shape. I love the pages. Let's quickly flip through the pages. Look at that. So nice. And I like how vintage images blend here really well with some modern watercolors. Really great imagery here. Oh, wow. So inspiring. Do you remember how we scored those lines at 1¼ of an inch away from the sides of the spine paper piece? That's what we need to take into consideration now when gluing the signatures down to the cover of our journal. You will need to draw guidelines on the cover 1 1/8 of an inch away from the chipboard edge. Here I have that line, and I have another line right here, so that will help you see where exactly your spinal piece will have to be glued down to the cover of the journal. And of course, you will do that only once you have the ephemera folder attached to the middle row of the holes on the spine. Let's create that ephemera holder now. I will be using this green cardstock for creating my ephemera holder. The size of this cardstock piece is 10 inches by 7.5. I scored it at 5 inches and then I added 2 score lines. One was at 4 7/8 and the second one was at 5 1/8. And I will explain why later on. Next, we will need 4 pieces of either tracing paper or vellum for the pockets. And these measure 4 7/8 by 2 inches. I will be gluing them down to the cardstock piece. I will use just plain liquid glue. I will take one of the tracing paper pieces and apply glue to 3 sides of this piece, close to the edge, and then I will align this with the bottom of my future ephemera holder, and that will make sure that I have everything straight. If there is any overhanging of the tracing paper, which might happen, just trim it down. And do the same with another piece on the right side of the folder, like this. To know where exactly to adhere the second pair of the tracing paper pieces, I will mark at 2 inches right here from the edge of the first tracing paper piece. And now I will know where exactly I need to start adhering the next piece. So the same thing, I apply glue along the 3 edges of the tracing paper. Like that. I match the corner of the tracing paper with that mark that we made a second ago, and I make sure that I glue it down straight along the edge of the green cardstock. We have another pocket here, and the same thing on this side. I will make a mark 2 inches away from the top corner of the tracing paper pocket here. I will add glue to the tracing paper. Once again, my glue doesn't cooperate. Okay, so we'll add some glue. And we will glue it down right here. Our pockets are ready. Let's trim the excess of the tracing paper here. Okay. We can now embellish our ephemera holder with some more of the beautiful papers from the pack. And these will measure 7 1/4 by 4 5/8. So I will glue them down right now. And I want to add a little fabric tab here on top. So I will glue it down first, and then I will add the paper on top. This is what we have so far. I will use my template to poke the holes. Since it's only one sheet, I'm not clipping it do the signature with the bulldog clips. I'm just holding it. Okay. Now in the same way that we stitched the signatures down to the spine, I will stitch this signature. And now it's in, sewn like that, and ready to hold some ephemera pieces from the pack. I have cut out some of the elements here, so a few of those cards I think we can put inside. Let me just have a look at it. So we have these nice cards with the birds that we can put in, and we have two of these ones and a bigger one like that. And some really nice rope bridge wedge tent. Oh, this is cute. I will put it in here. And there are some more. Let's see what I want to put in here. Another bird. And let's transfer these in here and take some additional ones. I really like these ones with the bugs and this vintage looking card. So we can put it here, and this one can go in here. Great. So that's what we have so far. We can also add some of the die cuts. We can glue them down to the tracing paper pockets just for some added interest. I like this piece. It's kind of a washi tape that we could use. Well, we'll use it somewhere else. Let's see, we can add a butterfly in here. Well, we'll get to this later on. Let's glue the spine and the signatures down to our cover right now, and keep on working on embellishing the pages later. Okay, so I really like how this comes together. We will take our cover and apply enough glue to the flap right here. I like to put some paper to make sure that I'm not messing the pages with the glue. Okay, so this is just tacky glue that I'm using here, and I need to say that it holds fabric and paper really nice together. I'm using it for about 7-8 years now, and I have never had any problems with any of my albums or journals that I made before. Okay, so we just have to align this piece along the guideline that we have and leave about 1/8 of an inch from the top and the bottom. Now let's go to this side and do the same. I will apply the glue and then use the guideline to glue the flap down to the cover. Before closing the journal, I like to leave it open for like 10 or 15 minutes to make sure that the glue dries enough. And once the glue is dry, we can go ahead and close the journal, fold our cover you might want to work out the spine just a little bit to make sure that it curves nicely. But that's what we have so far. We can now work on the additional pieces that we wanted to add to the covers.